Welcome to the first week of in-person Lent. Glad some of you were able to join us last Sunday. Last minute notice that the theater was not going to open and we weren't able to be here. So apologize for the last minute. Hope no one came out here. If you did, ask them. Maybe they'll comp you some movie tickets. For the rest of us that are able to be on Zoom, great to have you on there. Had a little teaser for our sermon series, what we'll be talking about during the season of Lent. And our series is all about the cross. It's called The Cross, simple series title, subtitled How It Changes Our Lives. I titled this one The Cross Part 1, which means there'll obviously be a Part 2 and then 3 and then a Part 4. As I mentioned last week, many of you are aware of this. We are... There we go. All right, we're up and running. We're in the season of Lent, which is a time of preparation, the 40 days leading up to Easter Sunday, or what I like to call it, Resurrection Sunday. It is this intentional time of fasting, prayer, almsgiving. My invitation challenge has been look for ways that you can intentionally enter into this season through fasting, prayer, almsgiving. And the whole purpose of Lent is that we would experience renewal, rebirth, and transformation. That's what we're after. That's why we're in this season, and that's our hope and prayer as we move our way toward resurrection. Recommended books for your Lenten reading, and this is my bibliography, I guess you could say, for the entire series. Been working on these books for about a year now. These are the ones that have heavily influenced me for this particular series. As we move along, you'll see some different references to each of these books. If you're looking for something good to read, something new, inspiring as a way for you to enter into Lent, these are the ones that I would recommend. Jesus and the Undoing of Adam, we will enter into that one a little bit this morning. Very short book, a little technical. This one, Unclean, Meditations on Purity, Hospitality, and Mortality. This is an easier read, absolutely mind-blowing. We'll get into this one a little bit next week. Did God Kill Jesus? We talked a little bit about that last week. We'll have a few quotes on that one today. And then Recovering the Scandal of the Cross. This one is a bit heady, a bit theological, so if you're into a little more deeper dive and a little more something that is steeped in a little more difficult theology, I guess you could say, this is the book for you. And then anything by René Girard. He is a French philosopher. We will be getting into his stuff, probably 2 sermons on this one, because his work, fascinating implications for the cross. This is my book list for Lent. This is what has been inspiring me. Been working on this, like I said, for about a year or so. These all come highly recommended. Last week, I mentioned this in our Zoom meeting. Here is the basis for our series. If there's no good reason for the crucifixion, there's no good reason to be Christian. If the crucifixion doesn't bring us closer to God and inspire us to be more loving to one another, then we may as well abandon the faith altogether. This comes from Did God Kill Jesus by Tony Jones. Read this and thought, yeah, the crucifixion has to change our lives. That is the foundational truth of the Christian faith. And that's what we'll be talking about over the next couple of weeks. These questions in particular, what does the cross mean for us today? How are we to arrange our lives in response to the cross? And then how are we changed because of the cross? We talked about this last week. All these questions that we're looking at, these were questions that the New Testament writers were trying to answer in the first century. If you read through all the letters, the gospel accounts in the New Testament, all the writers are trying to wrap their minds, trying to wrap their heads around, well, what happened on the cross? The cross was this revolutionary event. It was unexpected, mystifying. These writers, the first followers of Jesus, were trying to figure out, what does it mean for us? And then what does it mean for how we are to respond? How do we live our lives in response to what Jesus did on the cross? And for the New Testament writers, the cross didn't have one simple explanation. Instead, there were multiple explanations for why the cross mattered, multiple explanations about how the cross changes us and what actually happened on the cross. So the cross, it's like looking at a prism. You shift it around a little bit and you get a different color. You look at it from another angle and you see something that you hadn't seen before. It's the same way with the cross. The New Testament offers all these different ways for us as the readers to understand what is happening, what God was doing when Jesus was there on the cross. Over the next couple of weeks, I want to look at the cross as a prism, explore it from all these different angles so that we can somewhat, I don't think we'll ever fully be able to do this, but wrap our heads around what happened and how we live in response. I mentioned we were going to start here with this book, Jesus and the Undoing of Adam. And for Baxter Kruger, the problem that the cross solves is we as humans have this false understanding of God. The cross corrects all the false ways in which we understand who God is and how God interacts with us. Let's do a little Olympics. Anyone watch some Olympics over the past couple of weeks? Okay, see a few head nods. Well, the starting point for Baxter Kruger, this is the starting point for the speed skating. The starting point for him is that the cross reveals the true nature of God. So for us, when we think about the cross, when we talk about what the cross is, what does the cross mean for us, a foundational truth, a starting point, is we have to understand that the cross reveals who God truly is. It shows who God is and what God is like and what God has always been like. His argument is that we humans have been missing the true picture. We have this false understanding of God. The cross comes to correctly allow us to see who God is. Here is Baxter Kruger. The calling of Israel was not about God dispensing accurate information about himself so that the Israelites could have a good theology, but rather the calling of Israel was about God himself re-entering into contact, into living fellowship and personal relationship. All the way back in the beginning of the story with God and humanity, God enters into the picture not in order to dispense information about who God is, not to just give us good theology and good ideas about who God is, but all because of relationship. Religion comes from this Latin word religare, which means to bind back, to connect. Religion at its best reconnects us to God. Religion, when it is doing the thing in which religion is supposed to do, it fixes that which has been broken. There's a rift. There is something that breaks. Well, religion is intended to put back together that which has been torn apart. Unfortunately, religion, the Christian faith is guilty of this as well, has become about this. Making sure that the furniture, the theological furniture in our heads is arranged properly. If we can think all the right things about God, if we can believe all the right things about God, well, then in some way we'll experience God. But what Baxter Kruger is saying, and I tend to agree with this, I love how he puts it, is that just dispensing information, just making sure that your theological framework is arranged properly, that's not the point of what God desires in God's relationship with you. But rather, God desires fellowship, relationship. He goes on and he says this: the Israelites tried to create a religion in order to keep God at a safe distance. Here's what religion does when it goes awry. Religion tries to control. Religion tries to contain. Religion tries to capture who God is in one picture. It's like a snapshot. You see a picture, but the truth is you don't know what's happening at the time in which that picture was taken. Maybe there's a picture and everyone is smiling, but 5 seconds before that, there were complete breakdowns. You ever take a picture like that, especially when you have younger kids? You know how it is. You're trying to corral everyone together. And so you might see the picture and assume everyone's happy, but as soon as the picture's taken, everyone goes back to bickering and fighting. When religion becomes all about ideas and thoughts and these intellectual truths, all you're getting is one snapshot, a picture, but you're missing the dynamic aspect of your relationship with God. Religion turns God into this fixed, static being. But in reality, what God has always been looking for is this dynamic, this interacting relationship with humanity. Here's Exodus chapter 3. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites. I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you." And they ask me, "Well, what's his name? Who is this God? We want to capture him in words. What should I tell them?" And God says, "I am who I am." As if that really clears it up. It's like you're going to church today to learn about I am who I am. People would be like, "What are you talking about?" But God doesn't. What's up? Popeye? You're right. Maybe this is where Popeye got it from. No idea. Popeye, inspired by Exodus 3. God said to Moses, "I am who I am." That's what you're going to tell them. Just say, "I am has sent you." As if that really clears it up. The actual Hebrew, asher, asher. I am who I am. I am where I am. I mean, that word, it's ambiguous in how it's to be translated. This is how it's translated here, but in reality, the Hebrew is way more ambiguous than the English language has made it out to be. God doesn't give this one fixed, static name so that the Israelites can capture God and say, we have God in a box, we've contained God, we know everything about who God is, we have him fixed right here, but rather God says, well, I am. I am this living, interacting being that desires fellowship and relationship with humanity. What about this one? Exodus 20, 10 Commandments. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Don't turn God into an idol. All these other religions are doing that. They're fixing God. They're giving an image of who God is. And God's like, no. You can't contain me in an image. You can't contain me in an idol. I'm bigger than that. I'm more mysterious than that. And so what happens is, and we see this all throughout the Old Testament, and we see it in our world today, we turn the law into God. We turn theology into God. We even turn the Bible into God. I have a good friend, he's a pastor, and he goes, "Man, Dave, there's so many churches, they're not worshiping Jesus, they're worshiping the Bible. The Bible is meant to lead us to Jesus, yet how often do we elevate the Bible above who Jesus is? And if we can just read the Bible in the right way, if we can get our mental theological framework the right way, that's not how it works. Word of God that we find in the New Testament, it's not referring to the Bible. The word is Jesus. Yet how often do we elevate our Bibles over the person of Jesus? We turn theology, the law, the Bible into God instead of this living, interacting being. So Jesus comes and Jesus embodies what is true of God. Relationship, compassion, love, heart, forgiveness over rote obedience. Religious rituals without heart, just going through these motions because it's what we were told to do. It's what the law tells us to do. It's what the Bible tells us to do. So we go and we do these things, but there's no heart behind them. And those activities, those religious rituals, they're void of God's Spirit. But here is where religion over relationship and mercy leads. Let's look at John chapter 18. This is after Jesus has been arrested. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. One of the religious officials slapped Jesus in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? Is this the way that you answer the religious authority? If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, here's the man. As soon as the chief priests, the religious authorities, and all of their officials, those that were following them, the good religious folk of the first century, as soon as they saw Jesus, what did they scream? Crucify, crucify. Pilate answered, you take him, you crucify him. I want no part in this. Pilate's like, this is wrong. I want no part in your religious disagreements. I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law. We have a religion. And according to that law, according to that religion, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. Religion blinded these good religious folk. I mean, they are after God's heart. Sometimes we miss this when we read the gospel accounts. But these are God-honoring men and women who they want to honor God with their lives. But because the law has been turned into God, because theology has been turned into God, they were blinded to the presence of God in their midst. This is what happens when we put religion over mercy and love and relationship, which then raises a few questions for us. How often do we crucify God by our obedience to religion over mercy and compassion? Well, this is what the Bible says. And so I'm not going to love this person, or I'm going to exclude them. I mean, how often do we crucify God by our blind obedience to a set of laws and rituals rather than following the way of Jesus, the way of mercy, love, forgiveness, compassion for all people? How about this? How often do we crucify God by forming our personal view of God rather than allowing the cross to shape our understanding of God? Here's another quote from our book of the day. Adam projected his own brokenness, as it were, onto God's face. See, we all do this. We all have areas in our lives that have been broken, areas in need of healing, pain, hurt. And just like Adam, how often do we project our human frailty, our brokenness, and say, well, this is what God is like because this is what I've experienced. I call this a bottom-up view versus a top-down view. Not that I believe God is up there in the sky, but rather it's this view where we allow our humanity to give us an understanding of God rather than allowing the true picture of God to influence how we see God to be. So what is God truly like? We look to the cross. If we want to know what God is really like, what did we see happen on the cross? God's never-ending commitment to us. This is where Jesus was led. This is why Jesus went to the cross, because of God's never-ending commitment to you. The cross shows us that God is always present. God is always near. God is always available. God is never hiding. God is never far from you. God is always present to you. This is what we see on the cross. The cross also shows us that God is a God of endless grace, never-ending forgiveness, a God of ultimate love. So our response, if that is what God is like, well, then how does God invite us to live? Well, in the same way. To live a cross-shaped life. A few ways we can look at it. Commitment to each other. Loving each other. Committing to the well-being, the healing of every other human. It means a life of compassion, a life of mercy, a life of love, a life of presence. Now, God has always been this way. God has always been like this. This is what God was after from the very beginning of God's relationship with humanity. But obviously, our humanness sometimes gets in the way, and we create these false ways of understanding God. But I read this a couple of months ago, and I have been thinking about this idea for probably about 3 months at this point, and I just can't shake this idea. If God has always been this way, which is true, and God has always been inviting us to live this way, but there is a, let's call it a disclaimer. And this comes from Tony Jones' Did God Kill Jesus? All the Gospels record the activities of Jesus from the human perspective. But what was happening in the life of God during Jesus' life? Here, we enter into more speculative territory. Of course, we'll never know. This is pure speculation. But I love his thinking on this. But we can draw some tentative conclusions. We can say that in Jesus, God was experiencing something that God had not experienced before. To take it one step further, we can surmise that in Jesus, God was learning. In Jesus, God crossed the line from sympathy with the human condition to empathy with humans. That is, God went from pitying us to truly understanding us by actually becoming one of us. I read that, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about that literally for 3 months. Because just that idea, it blew my mind, but it brought me to what we read in Hebrews. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. We have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he didn't sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Here's how I've been wrapping my head around this idea. This is the first picture I have of me and my son, Reese. Now, before you become a father, you love your kids. You see the picture when you get the ultrasound, and you're like, okay, it looks like an alien and kind of a weird, you're trying to understand what's going to happen, but you have love for your child. Then your child is born, and that love becomes deeper than what it was before. In a sense, it was almost like it was this idea that you had in your head, but then you start experiencing what it means to actually be a parent. And hopefully, if everything goes the way in which it's supposed to go, you grow in love for your child. When I think about what we just read from Tony Jones about God learning, God experiencing something that God hadn't experienced before, I kind of view it in that way, where now entering into the human experience, God's love was endless, but it became even deeper, if that even can make some sense. It's as if God doubled down and God's heart grew even bigger and larger in understanding the human condition and what it means to be human. Because without experiencing something, you can't fully know what it feels like. And then as I thought even more about this, here's a picture of a hockey game I went to with my dad and with Reese. It works the other way as well. As I've become a father, I'm now able to understand my father a little more. But I never had that experience until I became a parent, until I became a father. And then you start thinking, oh, now I know why my dad did the things that he did. But before, when you're a kid, I mean, especially when you're 12, 13, teenager, whatever, you're like, oh, man, parents, like, what do they possibly know? And then you become a parent, you become a father, and if you're a parent, have you ever had that moment like, oh my goodness, I'm becoming just like my father, just like my mother? And there's this deeper understanding that happens. Oh, now I know why my dad did the thing that he did. Now I know why he said this. But until you actually experience that, you only know it in your head. It's almost like the cross brought God's love for humanity even deeper. Jesus experiencing the absence of God on the cross. You ever experienced that before? Where it feels as if God isn't there? Even though intellectually you know God is there, but God just feels so distant. What about human pain? Well, Jesus on the cross experienced human pain. I mean, Jesus living on earth experienced all the range of human emotions. As Hebrews says, all of the temptations that we as humans face. There's something that happened in the life of Jesus that had never happened to God before, because God hadn't been human before that moment, which to me is like absolutely mind-blowing. But yet God's love for us is so great. God's commitment to us is so big and endless that God went to those depths. God took on the form of humanity to show us, I'm with you. I love you. Grace, forgiveness, mercy is upon you. And God went to the extreme measure in order to show the extent of that grace. There's no limit to that forgiveness. There's no limit to that grace. But rather, God is endlessly merciful and desires that fellowship, that relationship. And that is what the cross shows us. We as humans, we find all these ways to contain God, to try to control who God is. God breaks all those stereotypes. God breaks all those pictures that we use to try to pin God down and says, I'm bigger and better and more loving than you could ever imagine. And I'm showing you this in this moment here. So that's part one of the cross. What the cross shows us, what the New Testament writers were trying to understand. And my hope is that as you reflect on the cross this season of Lent, that you would experience in greater depths the love that God has for you. And may you see that God's grace, forgiveness, and mercy over you knows no limits and knows no bounds, and will go to the extreme to show you how loved and worthy you are.